Hey Dolores. Hey Rob. Hey Andy Blair. Hey Russell Gallman. Nice to see you all here. Hope you can hear me well. I'm going to share for a minute or two and then I'll be back. Thanks. Okay, I'm back. You lost me? How's my sound? Have you got me now? Okay, I'm back. You lost me? How's my sound? Have you got me now? Oh, thanks. Thank you, Russell. That's great. Okay, now let's get some visual. Oops. No visual. Thank you, Russell. Maybe that's why you lost me. Okay, now let's get some visual. I'll fix that. Oops. No visual. That's why you lost me. I'll fix that. Okay, that should do the trick. I hope that everybody will be able to both see me and hear me now. And you'll let me know, I hope. Randy, hi, how are you? Nice to see you here. Okay, so our topic for tonight is that, or at least our first topic for tonight, is that the Amazon is still burning. What are the consequences? And what do we do about it? Steve, nice to see you here, Steve. Welcome. What happened to Andy Blair? He was here for a minute, and then I think he checked out. Lana, hi, how are you? It's great to see you. So the topic for tonight is the Amazon is still burning. And let's talk about the consequences first. And then let's talk about the policies. There was an article that appeared in Truth Out. It was by Marjorie Cohn, I think. Yes, Marjorie Cohn at Truth Out. And she pointed out Amazon fires will have global consequences, and she called for the UN to act. And that was the title of her article in Truth Out. I will share the article with you, and we'll go over it. Let me get in there to share it. There we go. I think you can see the title now. Let's get it scrolling. So she talks about 75,000 fires so far this year in the rainforest, an 84% increase from last year, so nearly double. Since August 10th, a spate of intentionally set fires have been raging in the Amazon. However, Jair Bolsonaro, who took office in January, let them burn for 2 weeks before sending firefighters to put them out following an international outcry. The fires actually pose an imminent peril to the 34 million people and 3 million species of animals and plants that live in the world's largest rainforests, which covers 2 million square miles. And Marjorie Cohn says damage from the raging fires will change the face of the planet. The rainforest is home to 10% of the species on Earth, including many types of plants and animals that cannot be found anywhere else. There are many people saying that the loss of the biodiversity in the Amazon and the loss of the rainforest will be beyond devastating for the planet. There are some who even think that it may cause an initial rise of 6 degrees centigrade in by global temperature to the rapid output, of carbon. If the rainforest were to but keep on burning, if the fires aren't actually put out. So anyway, French President Emmanuel Macron called on members of the G7 summit to discuss this. And since the publication of this article, they have discussed it. Okay, and Macron has called for sanctions. And there was a reply from Jair Bolsonaro, who said the French president's suggestion that Amazon issues be discussed at the G7 without participation by the countries in the region evokes a colonialist type of mentality that is out of place in the 21st century, unquote. I don't think it does, but what it does evoke, I think, is a great power mentality to engage in collective security to stop an event that's happening in Brazil that in its consequences can go far beyond the borders of that particular country. In a case like that, national sovereignty means much less. Anyway, in light of Bolsonaro's refusal to provide the resources to extinguish the fires, there was a threat from Macron to block the Mercosur EU trade deal. And Bolsonaro then gave in, and he allocated $7 million and sent 44,000 troops and also military aircraft to the burning areas. But Cohn says that falls short of what is needed to put the fires out and save the Amazon. And there's a quote from the head of the Biospheric Sciences Laboratory at NASA, whose name is Douglas Morton. And he said, quote, "We're talking about battling what will be hundreds of fires burning simultaneously beyond any network of roads distributed across thousands of miles." Continuing the quote, "It's quite a challenge to mobilize resources for one of these fires, but to simultaneously track down and put out a number of these sorts of fires demands essentially a full press." And he added, "You really do need thousands of people." So Bolsonaro has now committed 44,000 troops. I don't know whether the $7 million is enough. The countries in the G7, the US, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Canada, donated $20 million to fight the fires. However, Bolsonaro has refused to accept the money unless he gets an apology from Macron. And so Cohn remarks, he is playing games while the Amazon burns. President Trump, who skipped the climate meeting at the G7 summit, later said he hadn't agreed to contribute to the $20 million because of lack of coordination with Bolsonaro. So Trump is, along with Bolsonaro, playing games. And Cohn goes on and says, even if the money was accepted, it would not be sufficient. Rick Swan of the International Association of Firefighters told the Washington Post, by comparison, to extinguish the 2017 Tubbs fire in Northern California, the costs alone were $100 million. In other words, says Cohn, a massive international effort is needed to end the fires. And then she goes on to discuss the cynicism and back of the Bolsonaro appeal to uh, but, she says those who are critical of ongoing colonial and neo-colonial dynamics but not entirely familiar with the context of the fires in Brazil may at first be skittish about backing international efforts to pressure Bolsonaro to end the fires. In truth, however, his appeal to anti colonial politics is deeply cynical and should not deter progressives with anti colonial commitments from backing international endeavors to end the fires. My sentiments exactly. The cynicism, of Bolsonaro's anti colonial appeal is evident in the context of widespread popular protests in which the Brazilians have marched holding signs, with messages such as, quote, the Amazon belongs to the world and we need the world's help right now, unquote, and, quote, SOS, unquote. Protesters took part in some 30 demonstrations across Brazil last weekend, and thousands of demonstrators have marched in Rio chanting, quote, the Amazon stays, out with, out with, out with Mr. Bolsonaro, quote, unquote. Indigenous peoples in Amazon have also made clear that they hold the Bolsonaro government responsible for the destruction of the Amazon. And the coordination of indigenous organizations of the Brazilian Amazon, which is abbreviated COIAB, issued a statement expressing, quote, extreme concern about the rapid destruction of the rainforest, home to our families and to all the resources we need to live. The related record rates of deforestation and outbreaks of fire are a consequence of the anti-indigenous and anti-environmental genocidal speeches of this government, unquote. Of course, they were referring to the Brazilian government in this instance. A group of indigenous Pahuni Kuan leaders recently called for a stop to the fires, saying, quote, nature is crying and we are crying. If we don't stop this destruction, of Mother Nature, future generations will live in a completely different world to the one we live in today. This is Mother Nature's cry, asking us to help her. And we are working today so that humanity has a future. But if we don't stop this destruction, we will be the ones that will be extinguished and burned, and the sky will descend upon us, which has already begun to happen. Unquote. And Cohn goes on and says the UN Security Council should order international firefighters and an economic and an economic boycott. As empowered by the UN Charter, the Security Council should find the fires in the Amazon pose a, quote, threat to peace, unquote, and order measures to restore and maintain international peace and security. Those measures, quote, may include complete or partial interruption of economic relations, unquote. The Council should require that member states refrain from entering into trade agreements with Brazil unless and until it agrees to allow international economic and physical firefighting assistance. As Moira, okay, it looks like Bierce, Amazon Watch's finance campaign director, said in a release issued by the Institute for Public Accuracy, the IPA, quote, now that the world is finally paying attention, it's important to also understand that governments and companies around the world are emboldening the toxic policies of the Bolsonaro government when they enter trade agreements with his government or invest in agribusinesses companies that are operating in the Amazon, unquote. In addition, the Council should order member states to contribute money and personnel to fight the fires raging in the Amazon. And Cohn says there's precedent for this type of resolution. 1985, the Security Council passed the Resolution 569, which condemned the South African government's policy of apartheid. It urged members of the UN to adopt various measures, including suspension of all new investment in South Africa, a prohibition of the sale of South African currency and coins, restrictions on cultural relations and sports, suspension of guaranteed export loans, prohibition of new nuclear contracts, and prohibition of sales of computer equipment that could be used by the South African police and army. The international boycott of South Africa led to the end of the apartheid regime. All UN member countries are bound by the resolutions of the Security Council. Article 25 of the Charter says, quote, the members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council, unquote. Article 49 states that the UN members, quote, shall join in affording mutual assistance in carrying out the measures, unquote, upon which the Council decides. Of course, I point out, there's a big barrier to actions of the Security Council. And the big barrier is the friendly relations between Bolsonaro and President Trump, which could lead which could lead to a veto in the Security Council by the United States of any resolution actually condemning the Brazilian government. Of course, this still remains to be seen, and the call, okay, is justified. I'm just pointing out what the likely difficulty with it is likely to be. In the next section, Cohn says that the policies, of Bolsonaro have exacerbated the fires. She says, excuse me, fires do not ignite themselves in the rainforest. Quote, basically, the Amazon hadn't burned in hundreds of thousands, or millions of years, said William Magnuson, a biodiversity specialist at the National Institute of Amazonian Research in Brazil. According to National Geographic. Quote again, a growing number of man-made fires have plagued the Amazon in recent years, imperiling the ecosystem. The rainforest is not built for fire, unquote. Cohn goes on to talk about the farmers in the Amazon who cut down trees to clear the area for planting, and the miners and loggers, she says, start fires to cover their illegal activities. Some fires are set to force indigenous peoples from their land. However, all these activities have been fanned along with the flames by the Bolsonaro government. The New York Times analysis found that for the first 6 months of 2019, the pro-development, anti-environmental policies of the regime led to a 20% decrease in enforcement measures aimed at uh, aimed at um, aimed at protecting against deforestation as compared to the same period in 2018. Then we have some further quotes, and again the call for action from the international community. And she says we have to act internationally to save the precious rainforest in the Amazon. Citizens of the 15 member countries on the Security Council should pressure their governments to vote in favor of a resolution calling for a boycott and the provision of resources to quell the forest fires. The future of our planet is at stake. So Brazil may indeed be facing political pressure, very severe, including an economic a set of economic sanctions in order to boycott the goods, of that country. That may not succeed, as I indicated earlier. A lot is going to depend on Donald Trump. So, for another perspective on the fires, I want to shift over now to an article in Counterpunch by Dean Baker. And you're seeing that one up on your screens now. Title of it is Brazil, the Amazon, and global warming. And I'm going to go through that now. Okay, so Brazil has gotten a huge amount of bad press with the fires in the Amazon. And he says, while the policies of the right wing president are disastrous, there is an important part of the story that is being left out of most of the discussions. So here Baker actually presents a new perspective. It says the reason we're worried about the global warming is because rich countries, most importantly the United States, have been spewing huge amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere for well over a century, while destroying the native forests on their lands. They also have paid to have forests in other countries destroyed in order to meet their resource needs. He says this is the context in which destruction of the Amazon is a worldwide problem of enormous proportions. He says the Amazon is a treasure which should be preserved even if global warming was not a crisis, but that is a different matter. The blaming Brazil story is one where a group of rich boys are sitting around in their mansion eating a huge place of cookies. Meanwhile, they send the housekeeper from room to room to make the beds and clean up. After the housekeeper finishes, she sees the last cookie on the plate and begins to reach for it. The rich boys then all yell at her for being greedy, for wanting to take the last cookie. An apt story, I think, for this particular situation. And Baker says the rich country's lack of concern for the environment made it cheaper for them to develop. Now, poorer countries who are struggling to develop are being told that they need to respect the environment for the good of the planet. He says, in fact, they do need to respect it, but we, the rich countries, have to pay them to do it. After all, it is a problem we created. That may not be a politically popular position here, but it is a politically serious one on a world basis, and the only plausible way to limit warming by saving the forests. That wasn't actually quite a quote. I editorialized a little bit, but it's very close to what Dean said, and I think it's quite right. I think the perspective of this article is actually quite right. We do have to pay for it. If we want them to keep the forests, we're going to have to pay them to do it. So we have to figure out a scheme for that. We have to figure out a politics for that. We have to figure out how that's going to happen. It should probably best happen actually through the UN, but of course, it will have to be financed by those who are in a position to finance it, including the United States and the other wealthy nations, of Europe, and of course Australia and Canada, New Zealand, and other wealthy nations. All have to contribute because we, of course, are the ones who've put the planet in such a fix that retaining the Amazon and other rainforests are so very important. We also have to keep in mind that we could make things easier in relation to keeping the forested areas if we were to plant the kinds of crops, the kinds of plants that draw down carbon and that can be harvested fairly frequently without placing carbon back into the air. There are crops like that. A few weeks ago, I covered a post by Ellen Brown, which talked about planting hemp on a very large scale, and basically having 3 harvests a year all around the world to create the raw materials for manufacture of all kinds of products from hemp. And her suggestion, I thought at the time, was a fairly compelling one. And my daughter tells me that there's a grain which grows in the desert that's known as teff, and that also is a plant that draws carbon out of the air very, very quickly, and that can be planted across wide areas of arid country here in the United States, Arizona, New Mexico, of course, in parts in parts, okay, of Utah, uh, but, of course, as well in uh, parts of California, okay, any areas of the United States which are arid currently and which grow little, teff could be planted in order to ease the problem. And it can be planted, okay, in arid areas, okay, of other nations as well, drawing carbon back out of the air. So we have to take a lot of action ourselves, not only to prevent, okay, the destruction of the rainforests, but also to get that carbon out of the air using natural methods and techniques for doing so. And we've got to do this quickly. And to do it quickly, we need to change our political system. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call a halt to this first stream. I'm going to take a look at your comments, and then I'm going to quickly go to the second stream, which is going to deal with our political situation here in the United States. But first, I do want to go to your comments. Kenneth Lee Fredrickson joined, and Robin Halsey joined. Margot Shepard joined. I don't have very many comments. So there we are. I'm going to change my perspective here. There we go. There we are. So okay, I'll wait to see if you've made any further comments. While I'm waiting, I hope you'll please share, like, and subscribe for this video. And please become a patron at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And thank you very much for that. I'll now make a final check for comments. And Robin Halsey says, love you, Joe, but not what's happening to the Earth. There's no planet B. Yeah, you can say that again, Robin. There's no planet B. And even if there were, I don't think too many of us would have the means to get to planet B. It's not like taking a trip on the subway. Even if there were, I don't think too many of us would have the means to get to. Or I suppose I should say the metro. Okay, so since I don't see any other comments, I'm going to end this stream now. And I'll be back in just a few minutes with the second stream, which is on democracy and rigging and the difficulties we're having with our American system. Just a few minutes. The second stream, which is on democracy and rigging difficulties we're having with the